John 2, verses 1 to 12. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for a ceremonial washing, each holding from 80 to 120 litres. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out their choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him.
Morning everyone. Here I am on a bit of a dog walk this morning. It's beautiful. And I found this bridge over this little stream. And it reminded me of a story. One of when I was about 7 years old. One of my more embarrassing moments. Basically, when I was about 7, my parents took my older sister and I on a camping holiday. And one day they took us to a quaint little town or village. And right in the centre was a beautiful stone bridge over a low stream. This was the perfect stream and bridge combo for a game of poo sticks. I'm hoping you all know how to play poo sticks. Basically, my family joined in with a group of other people to play in a round of poo sticks. We grab our sticks, we make our way to the side of the bridge, we all lean over, someone counts 3, 2, 1, and then the sticks are dropped into the water. Now, at 7, I fancied myself as a top sprinter, and so when everyone dropped their sticks, I think to myself, I know, I can be the first one to see which stick comes out first if I run down to the riverbank and have a look as they come out of the bridge. So I set off at top speed down the bridge, round the side, without knowing that at the bottom where the riverbank is, there's a number of tree roots sticking up that are quite a trip hazard. So as I leg it, top speed, probably going a bit too fast, and turn the corner without really knowing what was there, I hit one of these tree roots and go absolutely flying. At exactly the same moment that everyone else has made their way casually over to the other side of the bridge to look over to see which stick makes it out first. But instead of seeing sticks coming out from under the bridge, they see a 7-year-old boy hit the water. So embarrassing. And what made it all worse was the fact that from there I had to walk a long way back to where we parked our car, and then from the car park an awful long way back to where we were camping, soaking wet with everyone pointing the finger and laughing at me. Not great. But I'm happy to share it with you because it was a bit of a silly thing and I can laugh about it now.
Now, I told you that story as a bit of fun, but there is a point. I think in our culture we can use humour and laughter as an antidote to our embarrassment. And so just like with my poo stick story, we can find it's really helpful to laugh at ourselves in order to move on. But laughing at ourselves cannot fix all of our problems. Embarrassment is often only temporary and easily heals. But in life, we all battle with much deeper wounds. So now I can share an embarrassing story with you and we can all get some joy out of it. But if I asked you to share your deepest shame, any joy would be sucked out of the room really quickly. But yet we all struggle with shame. We all have stuff that we work really hard to make sure that nobody knows about, because in part, we're just not sure how even we would deal with it. And no amount of laughter can take it away. In fact, our shame has the opposite effect. Our shame can rob us of joy. I think, thanks in part to social media, we have developed a bit of a culture of shame. That when people mess up, we are quick to capitalize on it in order to shame the individual. But cultures of shame are not a new thing, and neither is the antidote to it. We're probably all very familiar with the story in the Gospels about Jesus attending a wedding party, a wedding feast in Cana in Galilee. You probably know it well. We heard it read just a few moments ago. But I wonder if we're aware of what is happening here and how this story is about far more than turning water into wine. In fact, it is really one that speaks about shame and restoration. You see, unlike our culture, ancient cultures put far more emphasis on the family and community rather than the individual. And so a marriage is far less about promoting the happiness of a couple and far more about binding together communities. And so the bigger, the stronger and more numerous the families of a town, the better the economy, the better its security, and the more everyone flourished. This meant that weddings and wedding feasts were far bigger and a far bigger deal than they are today. Each wedding and its feast was for the entire town, celebrating the good fortune of the whole community, not simply the couple. And so families would have spent months preparing for these celebrations because you wouldn't want anything to go wrong, because this is a culture of shame. And so in essence, get it wrong and you'll bring shame on the whole community. In this story of Christ revealed, Jesus and his mother, Mary, are invited to a wedding. And almost right at the beginning of the extended celebrations, when everything is just getting going, there's a great disaster. The festivities are just kind of kicking into gear, and then the family run out of wine, probably the single most important element of this ancient feast. Essentially, when the wine runs out, the party is over. But there is Jesus in the midst of this almighty mess. And you see, this is far more than a story of a social faux pas. This is really a story of a potential psychological and physical catastrophe. This couple, this family, and this community were about to experience a misfortune from one which perhaps they might not even recover. And hoping to remedy the situation is Jesus' mother, Mary, who goes to her son and asks him to help. Initially, it seems that Jesus didn't want to get involved, but then he steps into the situation that could see communities divided, and he turns it around so that the couple's reputation is intact, the family's honour and the community's integrity are upheld, and the party goes on. Yes, Jesus did the extraordinary. He turns everyday water into wine. John summarises the scene with these words. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which his glory was revealed. Now, the key to understanding this event is in this word, signs. So in essence, this is not simply a miracle, it was a sign. A sign is a signifier, a symbol of something else. Jesus didn't have to exercise his power in this situation, but he did, and it became the first of the signs through which his glory was revealed, his identity, his purpose to others. The Christ is revealed. But it raises a question. How does turning water into wine reveal what it is that Jesus came to do? How does this moment show that he is the Christ? Okay, imagine for a moment you're an MP who's about to stand for an election, or you're a business owner about to launch a new brand, or you're a musician about to release new music. In every case, you would choose your first public presentation really carefully. You'd want to handpick the right moment in order to make a significant impact and leave people knowing exactly what you're about. You'd want to make sure that every detail was thought through, that it was perfect, and that everything you said and did conveyed the message of what you're about. So look again at Jesus' first public sign. No one is dying, no one is demon-possessed, and no one is starving. In fact, at this point in time, most people are having a great time. So why would Jesus decide that the first sign of which would speak about why he has come is to keep a party going? Why would his first sign be turning water into wine? What would this act say about what Jesus has come into the world to do? If you've got a Bible, look again at the situation. In verse 9, we're introduced to the master of ceremonies, the guy who's in charge of the festivities, who encourages people to celebrate and to make sure that everything that happens is impeccable. So when Jesus turns everyday water into wine, the master of ceremonies responds by saying to the bridegroom, "You've brought out the best wine when others would bring out the cheap stuff." Jesus' act declares that he is the true master of the banquet. He is the Lord of the feast. According to Isaiah, at the end of days, the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all people, a banquet of aged wine, the best meats, and the finest of wines. At Cana, Jesus lets us know that he is the Christ and that he will preside over a joyful feast, an eternal banquet that is coming at the end of history. In essence, Jesus says, as the Lord of the feast, I come to bring joy. That's why my calling card, my first miracle, is to set everyone dancing and laughing. I'm here to bring life in all its fullness. Now consider how Jesus did this. The water jars. They tell us far more about why it is that Christ came, about the Christ revealed. You see, the Jewish tradition had a great number of rites and rituals designed to remind people that God is holy and perfect, and that we as humans are flawed. Ceremonial washing reminded the Jews that to reconnect with God, they needed to seek his forgiveness and be made clean. At the wedding, the failure to provide enough wine would have caused more than embarrassment. The young couple would have been brought into public shame and dishonour upon their families. Jesus' miracle rescued them from all of that. And he did it by using the jars normally used for ceremonial washing. What Jesus did was symbolic. His act tells everyone that he is the Christ and what he's come into the world to accomplish. In reality, what the ceremonial jars and the sacrificial laws of the Old Testament could only point to. As humans, we are inherently flawed. We make mistakes. We hurt each other by our words and by our actions. Even good humour cannot cover the acts that damage us and cause us pain. Sometimes we can make things right by seeking forgiveness from the person we've wronged. But it is much harder when the sin is against God, because deep down inside, we know that we're not worthy of God's forgiveness. There is nothing that we can do or say to put things right with God. This is why Jesus came, to do what we could not, to set us right with God again. Jesus came to cleanse us from our sin, to purify us from what is spiritually wrong within us. This means that in Jesus, we no longer have to live under sin, but we can now live in him. Jesus came to bring us joy by washing away our sin. But just how does Jesus bring that healing, that cleansing, and that forgiveness? This is where we get to the heart of the narrative. When Jesus' mother, Mary, tells him that the wine has run out. And Jesus responds by saying, "My hour has not yet come." Now, if you read the Gospel of John really carefully, you'll discover that Jesus refers to his hour several times. And every time he's speaking is about his impending death. In essence, when Mary tells him that there is no wine, Jesus' response is to say, "Why are you telling me this? It's not my time to die." Jesus is in essence connecting the simple request for wine with the hour of his death, which makes no sense until we consider the symbolism. Turning water into wine is a sign of what Jesus has come to do. The wine represents the festive joy, the great abundance of God's grace. Now it has run out. But Jesus came to restore to us the joy of God's salvation and the abundance of God's grace. What is wrong can only be put right through Jesus' death and resurrection. In other words, at Cana, Jesus is already seeing beyond to the cross and grave. He knows that he can bring joy to the world. He can cleanse mankind from its guilt and shame, but the only way to do it is to die for us. Jesus brings us joy and life in all its fullness by losing his. This is why what happened at that wedding in Cana is so extremely significant. You see, the Old Testament frequently refers to God as the bridegroom and God's people as the bride. What that tells us is that God does not want to be distant, the kind of distant king who just lords his kingship over his subjects. No, God wants a loving relationship with us like that of a groom with his bride. Later in John's Gospel, when the disciples are criticized for not fasting, Jesus says, "Why should the friends of the bridegroom fast when the bridegroom is still with them?" Here Jesus is calling himself the bridegroom. And John makes much more of this theme in the book of Revelation. He says, "I saw a holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband." And then the angel said to me, "Write this: blessed are those who are invited to the wedding supper of the Lamb." In other words, at the end of time, there will be a feast to end all feasts, not a generic banquet, but a wedding feast celebrating the intimate and permanent union of God and humanity, now bound together forever. This is what Jesus has come to accomplish. We, the bride, the people Jesus loves, are finally united with him. The wedding at Cana reveals that the shame we experience in this life, in our fallen nature, doesn't have to rob us of this joy. That the water used to cleanse has been turned into wine. The message to us is simple. Even right now, when we're in the midst of sorrow, you can sip the cup of joy. Jesus has turned water into wine. Our sorrow and our shame has been turned to joy. This is what Jesus came to reveal. This is how he puts it right. And I finish with this. Today, Jesus wants us to allow him into the areas of our lives that we try and hide. He wants to offer in exchange for our guilt, in exchange for our sorrow, the joy of life with him. Today, Jesus is saying, "Here I am. Will you trust me? Will you allow me to take the guilt of your suffering and your shame? Will you allow me to replace it with my presence and the joy that only I can give?" I want to encourage you to let him in. And so as I finish, I'd love to pray for us. Perhaps as a symbol of releasing shame and burdens that you carry and letting Jesus in, you might like to open your hands as I pray. Jesus, we thank you We thank you for the unconditional love that you offer us. We thank you that there is forgiveness and cleansing that we could never accomplish on our own. We thank you that you're willing to pay that ultimate price for us, that through your death and resurrection, we no longer live in the bondage of sin and shame, but there is freedom and joy. Lord, would you come to us in our homes where we are this afternoon, that we who need to receive this joy would be set free. Take those of us who are suffering with our shame and bring us into new life in you. We thank you for your acceptance and your unfailing love, that you welcome each one of us to the feast. Jesus, we thank you.